miscommunication, and I'll go ahead and share my screen. You guys had some stuff that you wanted to start out with. So go. I think you can see that screen. So if you guys want to just tell me when you want the slides advanced, I'll let you
We've
get
gone
going.
over the first slides, Gino. We've
Okay,
covered
the
first ones right up until the first slide of yours. So you're ready to get started.
All right. So we're going to talk about weed management, and I'll give you kind of a compressed version because I know you all wanted to be out of here at 11. We'll probably go just a little bit over. Anyway, I'm Gino Graziano. I work with invasive plants as my specialty area in our integrated pest management program. And integrated pest management is kind of a big, broad phrase we use to describe how we use a mindset to approach managing weeds or other pests. So where we need to figure out what it is and use the most effective, least cost, and least damaging to the environment, or whatever your garden or whatever it happens to be, method of getting rid of whatever pest that is and controlling it. And sometimes that doesn't mean actually getting rid of the pest. It might mean working with it and using nature to kind of manage it as well. So we'll dive right into some of that. And so here's what we'll talk about. We'll briefly go over IPM, which I kind of just did a little bit. Some ways to identify and document plants and weeds that you might be dealing with, how to know what to use, how to kind of know timing, like best timing of control, and then some things about rotations and mulches that kind of go into that. This bottom picture is orange hawkweed in a wildlife refuge in Kodiak, and that one might be one that you'd want to get out of a flower bed. Not usually a problem in like your raised bed gardens with vegetables and things like that. So integrated pest management, our steps are to identify it first, then we investigate, why is it there? Usually, like especially with weeds, they're a sign of something that's going on. You got big chickweed in your garden, you probably got a lot of fertility, and chickweed's just everywhere. So and you might just need more competition with it, things like that. You look at the biology of the organism and think like, okay, what's the best time of year to manage it? Maybe it's when it's seedlings. If it's a perennial, it might be something that's best managed in the fall. When is this thing most vulnerable to whatever you're going to use? And then what sort of interactions it has in the environment. And then you kind of develop your control plan from there. So in these pictures, this is actually the Homer Soil and Water Conservation District controlling a thistle, creeping thistle. And so they identified this creeping thistle in an old pasture. And what they did to goes through these steps is they looked at the biology of that organism, and if they mow it in the midsummer as it's starting to flower, they can knock it down, start to starve its root system out. And that's important because this plant's a creeping perennial, meaning it's got root system that creeps, and it's a perennial. So it's got a lot of sugar stores in the ground and a deep root system. And so you knock it down and it starts to help starve that root system out. And then they sprayed the regrowth in the late summer, early fall. So like after a first frost. And this particular plant's really susceptible at that time of year because it happens to be transporting its nutrients to the root system. And when they do that, the systemic herbicide they were using followed that transport of the nutrients down into the roots and gives a better kill. And so they were able to, they used some herbicide in the first year, far less the second, and eventually it was gone. And that's the kind of thing you want to achieve, especially if you're going to be using an herbicide in the environment, is just to keep ratcheting back how much you're doing. And if you're hand pulling, ideally you're ratcheting back that effort too. And so, yeah, we're trying to achieve long-term management with this and minimal impact in the environment, and then also to non-target organisms too. And so somebody might be talking to you about insects later on, things like that. When you think about managing insects, you want to not damage those beneficial insects. So you have, say you have cabbage root maggot. You don't want to hurt those, the predaceous ground beetles that are in there, because they're going to eat the root maggot eggs as well as the larvae and other things that are pests. And so you're keeping those things in mind. So our first step, though, in integrated pest management is prevention. If you're cutting new ground, you have a chance to actually keep chickweed and hemp nettle and things out of it. And some of the ways, especially when you're gardening, I'll take your notice to the bottom pictures below, is to think about looking for weeds and getting things that don't have weeds in them that you're bringing in. Seeds are already kind of have their own control over that. And so if you buy a seed packet, it tells you what's in it. So there shouldn't be weeds in it unless you're buying seeds that are weeds to begin with. But some of the stuff to look out for is when you buy potted perennial plants, like say you're getting a fruit tree or something like that. Those are grown elsewhere for quite some time before they come to Alaska. If it's been in Alaska for a while, the person might have already been taking care of the weeds that are growing up out of that pot, but that soil that tree's been in has collected a lot of seed from the surrounding area. In this picture, these are thistles in what looks like a blue spruce that came up from the lower 48, and you don't want thistles in your garden. They have really tough spines that are going to hurt when they're in there, and you want to make sure you're not that's going to creep all over your yard and cause a big issue that you won't be able to get rid of easily without using some herbicide. And so we want to try to avoid that whole process and that can of worms, so to speak, just by preventing it from getting there. So look at the things you're buying, make sure you're not getting a 2-for-1 deal. If you use things like straw for your chickens, or just as bedding or mulch, getting something that's certified weed-free can help. There's an inspection program in the state to keep certain weeds out of straw. It's used primarily for the Iditarod, but when there's a good year for straw production, and most of it comes out of Delta Junction, some of it out of the valley, and good years are years when they don't have a ton of rain in the fall and they're able to get it up and harvest it. Then you can often get that at a mill and feed or other suppliers that might have sell straw anyway. Another thing to think about is with potatoes. Again, this isn't a weeds issue, but try to always be planting certified seed potatoes. Certified seed potatoes are not the ones you buy at the your grocery store to eat. They're ones you buy at a garden center that say seed potato on them. And the reason you want to buy those is because potatoes tend to harbor diseases, especially if they've been planted in the same place over and over. So you want to rotate your potatoes every 2 to 3, every 3 years is actually a thing from, so you plant it 1 year, don't plant in that spot again for 3 years. And that reduces the disease load. Certified weed-free or certified seed potatoes have been inspected for diseases on them. And so you also decrease your amount of disease that's in there if you have that seed potato that's certified. So don't plant table potatoes. Okay, so some ID resources for weeds, and this actually includes other invasive species too, or other pests. One is that we have a mobile app called Alaska Invasives ID. It's available free on iOS and Android. You should be able to just search in your app store for Alaska Invasives ID. The screen splash that I have a picture of still says Weeds ID. It used to be just weeds, but we've added both insects and plant diseases to it. And it can be used as a guide to help you identify things, whether you're out hiking or you're in your yard and garden. Looking at stuff. It doesn't have every weed in there that you might find, because we kind of filtered out based on how much money we had, how much we put in mostly the most invasive and hardest to control weed species. So some of the things like chickweed might not be in there, but there's some other ways that you can get at that. The one I really like to push for folks is you looking at weed seedling identification, and there's a link here. This is from Montana, the Northern Great Plains area at Montana State University. They put together a good online book for weed seedling identification. And what you can use that for is so like the easiest time of year, especially with annuals like chickweed and hemp nettle, is really to get at them when they're just seedlings. You can do pretty much anything at that point. You could use you can pull them up, you can flame them really easy. You could also use, like, most of the organic herbicides are contact herbicides that don't really kill the roots, but when it's a seedling, they're super susceptible to things like that. And so, and everything else is kind of small too. So it's easy not to hurt the root system when you're pulling things out, hurt the root system of the plants you want to have in there, but also to not get any of that organic or other chemical on the plants that you don't want to hurt. We also have a way to get a hold of us and get help with identification. The best way, there's a way through the mobile app, Alaska Invasives ID, but you have to have a second app called EdMaps. Probably one of the easier things is to go to alaskainvasives.org. We have a pest reporter, this www.pestreporter.alaska.edu, that you can go to as well. And it's linked to at alaskainvasives.org, which is easy to remember. And you can take pictures and basically fill out this form for us that guides you through some other questions, attach those pictures to it, and we'll get back to you about what we think it might be, and we can start the conversation on ideas of how to control it. And another thing to do as you're starting to move into it, especially if you're thinking about gardening year after year, is take some notes if you can. Mental notes are fine. That's what I usually use, but also just notes of where you saw things last year, when things are starting to sprout up, when you see seedlings. Those notes can especially help you out if you're thinking about doing things like putting down pre-emergent stuff, which there's both organic and inorganic versions of pre-emergent herbicides, because you want to beat the seedlings to growing, sprouting. And so if you put down a pre-emergent, you want to get that out early. And so if you have those notes, like, hey, in a heavy snow year, like the one we're currently in, the hemp nettle and stuff is going to start sprouting up in the middle of May. In a light snow year, it might start sprouting up in the beginning of May. Where you've seen it in the past can also help quite a bit in planning it and finding those things again if you're going to be pulling them up and stuff like that. I also like to use notes. I actively use notes when I garden in rotations of where I have put things, so that way you can know for sure that, oh yeah, I had potatoes here, and so now I'm going to move it to here and here. Especially if you have 3 to 4 or 5 beds of things, then that will help you keep track of those things, so you're not second guessing yourself and accidentally planting something when it should have had 3 years rest from potatoes, and now you got just 2. So some of the things we'll talk about for control types include rotation, roguing, which is really just pulling weeds, bed planting and mulches, and then water management using some cover crops can also help too. We'll get into some detail on that. And then we'll talk a little bit about chemicals as well, basically what kinds are out there and some things to watch out for and how you can pick them out and things like that. So bigger background though is how to find control information online. If you Google something like controlling bird vetch or controlling dandelions, you'll get a lot of hits on there that basically might be like wiki cows and things like that. And so you might get a lot of things that are urban legends or aren't necessarily tried and true ways of actually managing something. And so what you really want to do, at least the way I start out, if I don't know of another source, is down at the bottom. I'll put extension or cooperative extension in my search, and if you put that in there, your search engine will bring up those things first that are put out by us at UAF Extension Service, or maybe it's the Purdue puts out a lot of things, University of California, Davis, Oregon State. There's a lot of other extension. We already talked about Montana State. They have that seedling thing. So a lot of different extensions that have put out guides on how to do various management practices on different weeds or diseases. And so doing that is a great way to do it. You can also find some stuff on Invasipedia, which was something that they did for a lot of more of our high priority invasive plant species. And there was the Nature Conservancy that first put these out. And now the University of Georgia houses them in this thing they call bugwood. There's also out of Oregon State University Extension, there's the Pacific Northwest Weed Management Handbook. And this is one that's really, it's chemical heavy. They don't tell you much about how to pull things or how to view things like that. They're more on the end of like, here are the chemicals that you can use on this weed species and how effective they are and what rate to do. But really, like one of the best ways I usually start with, especially if it's something I don't know much about and haven't heard about other people doing, is and I want the big picture, is to try to look at it via using extension in my search engine. So with chemicals, the first thing I'll tell you is always follow the label, and it doesn't matter if it's a synthetic pesticide or a certified organic pesticide, which are usually like vinegars and things like that. You want to always follow the label. There's two major groups of chemicals that you should know about. One is contacts versus systemics, and this is important because if you're dealing with a perennial plant, you likely need to kill the root system if you can't just dig it up. And so, which is why you would be using a chemical anyway. And so you want to use something that's systemic then that will travel through the plant's vascular system to kill off that root system. A contact herbicide is just going to kill the portion of the plant it touches. And so you can see this here in this illustration. The contact herbicide on the upper left, gets the herbicide's been sprayed or daubed onto it in between those two black lines. And then you look over on the right, and the plant's only dead between those black lines. Then you put a systemic herbicide on this similar plant in between those two black lines, and now you can see that entire leaf is dead instead. There's also things that are pre-emergent or post-emergent. So that's another thing to pay attention to. Pre-emergent is something you put onto the ground and it keeps seedlings from growing. So it's before the seedlings have emerged from that, from their shell. And so a post-emergent, though, you have to actually have the leaves there in order for that to work. And like I said, there's organic and synthetic options for all of these different things that are out there. So most of your organic and natural herbicides, I think pretty much all of them, I haven't heard of one that's not that's post-emergent, are contact herbicides. And most of them are kind of like citrus oil concentrate. Some of them are salts, which might have a little bit of pre-emergent control if but usually that's because of the salt. And so you wouldn't be planting seedlings then or really new starts in that sort of treatment. Other things are high strength acids and iron that you can kind of overload some plants with. A word of note though with these is like be a little cautious with like the homemade products. They can have some effect that, like if you mix your own vinegar and oil, you might be able to brown down some of your dandelions and things like that. The stuff they sell though is pretty concentrated in comparison and will probably give you a lot more oomph for your buck. So you might kind of veer towards that, especially if you're going to be getting after some of the tougher to kill weeds or kind of bigger projects. These are, contact herbicides, especially the organic ones, are going to work really well on seedlings, but not perennials, because perennials, you have to kill that root system. So they don't always work that great with dandelions unless you're planning on doing repeated applications that basically end up starving out that root system. And then they're also non-selective, meaning they're going to damage any plant. So you can't really spray it over your whole garden. You've got to be direct towards that weed. There's some of them that are salt-based that I've seen that can be used in lawns. And it's because your lawn has a really well-established root system, and they're hoping that that salt doesn't get all the way down to basically damaging that root system of the grasses. But they're still non-selective. It'd be best to kind of get that onto just those plants and use some other things to get out there with the on your lawn. So the pre-emergent natural herbicides, they contain natural byproducts of plants that are going to prevent seedlings to regrow, things like corn gluten and things like that. Again, only works on germinating seedlings, so things that you want to get it down beforehand. They tend to degrade pretty rapidly, so they're going to last for 2 to 3 weeks, and then you might need to put more down. They can also act as a fertilizer, though, so that's kind of a cool thing with a lot of the organic ones. But they also have kind of a variable amount of effectiveness. You look on extension websites, and one of them will say, oh, it worked well on this, this, and this. Another one will say it did nothing to this, this, and this, as far as its pre-emergent control goes. The synthetic ones provide control for a long time. That's the idea as far as pre-emergent synthetic herbicides. They get into the ground, they're going to stay there for several months. Some of them you can actually put down in the fall, and they'll be active in the spring as well. They still only work on those non-germinating seedlings that haven't germinated yet. And you really need to be careful, especially with the synthetics, that it's labeled for use around whatever you're going to be planting. So there's pre-emergent herbicides you can use in a perennial garden flower bed. And there's other ones you can use in a vegetable garden. But then there's ones that you really aren't supposed to use in those. And it's usually, it's not necessarily because it's dangerous to you. It's mostly that it could damage those crops or whatever it is you're growing. And this is just an example of one of those contact herbicides, herbicidal soap. This one has, looks like this one's made from oranges, citrus oil, and citrus scent. A lot of them have acids, and they usually use, when they're acids, they're using a really concentrated acetic acid, sometimes glacial acetic acid, and then they mix it in with other stuff. The thing I'd want to kind of push out with you all to remember with these is they're still going to have some cautions associated with them, and you need to, with any herbicide, but including these ones, be wearing things like gloves and possibly eye protection and the like, because if if a wind comes up, a truck drives by and blows a wind and you get some in your face, that could burn you, that could hurt your eyes. You can also get that on your skin or your legs if you're not wearing pants, your feet if you're not wearing shoes, and especially with some of these concentrated acids, you're gonna end up with a mark because of it. So whether you're using an organic or a synthetic, use them cautiously. I think we can probably skip this one so we can get to talking about some of the other management practices. But this one is just an example of one of those acid ones. Again, these work by contacting the plant surface, and they're not selective. So you got to be careful about not getting it onto the crop, or if it's in a perennial bed that you're using it, make sure you're not getting it onto those perennials. But also, if you can't avoid it, that you can handle a little bit of damage from those. Yep, this points out that there's a caution section on all the herbicide labels, whether they're organic or not. And so this is where you're going to be looking to get an idea of what you're supposed to be wearing for PPE. That's on the right here. It says personal protective equipment or personal protection equipment. This one says long sleeve shirt, pants, shoes plus socks, eyewear, and then what to do in case you do get an exposure from even this organic herbicide. So this one happens to be combustible too. I don't know why that is. I can't remember what was in this one, but it's probably the oil that's in it. things like that. But just just to be sure that you're always paying attention to those labels and what's in these sections that have hazards. This is an example of a synthetic herbicide. This is one I talk to people about quite a bit for killing off chickweed, or not chickweed necessarily, although this one will work on chickweed. Bird vetch is what I was thinking of. Works really well on bird vetch. Is the active ingredients triclopyr. This is an example of a product that contains that. It's a brush killer, so it can take out your trees and things like that too. And the warning on this one is this product will kill or injure all woody plants contacted. So that's something I have to talk to people about if they want to do their bird vetch out of a perennial bed. Is like, well, if it's growing around trees or shrubs in your perennial bed, you might want to use something a little bit different than this product. And then this one, has other warnings about not using it around fruits or vegetables that are used for food and things like that that you need to do. Another thing to keep in mind with this, and probably any herbicide really, is when you use things to measure them out, kind of label those things herbicide only. That way you don't reuse that measuring cup for something else, because sometimes you end up buying something that's a concentrate and it has to be mixed with water or something else to get it to the right concentration to use on a particular weed. So cultural and mechanical methods include things like rotations and roguing, as well as planting. So when you think about rotations in weeds, you want to be thinking like, okay, some crops, flowers, or even the way you manage and harvest those are more aggressive and can actually help get weeds out than others. So like potatoes are kind of an aggressive thing, and you might be able to plant those in a weedy area, get away with weeding them twice early on, and then after that they're kind of shading everything out a bit more, so whatever's growing underneath them isn't as big of a deal. Whereas carrots are really sensitive to a lot of weeds, and so when I rotate into carrots, I do carrots last, because then I have the best chance of getting weed control into those things, and then the carrots come in. It goes like potatoes, and then I do the brassicas, and then I put carrots third. And so that way I have 3 times to get the weeds under control, and then the carrots come in. Another thing you can do though is to actually plan things around that can use mulches as well. And mulches is we'll get to what they all are, but I'm thinking of like weed barrier fabrics in this case. So things like zucchini and things like that. If you've got a really weedy bed, garden bed, you might use that crop, zucchini and other things, to put those into the ground, put a weed barrier fabric over the top of them, and that'll do that weeding work for you. You just have to plan to get the water underneath the weed barrier fabric. Some of them are actually permeable, and that's not as big of an issue. Roguing, basically pulling weeds or getting them up with a hoe. It's best done early when the weeds are small, but you're disturbing the soil constantly, and that can be good and bad. It's bad because that disturbance will bring up more weed seedlings and keep them coming up. The good part about that is if you can really keep on it, you might exhaust your soil at some point of that. Bed planting refers to planting things close together and using mulches. So it's kind of like intercropping in there. So you have your cabbages, and then you put other things to help compete with weeds in between them, like radishes and things like that. You got to be a little careful with it to not plant too close, and make sure you're getting enough water and other nutrients into that soil, because essentially in order to bed plant appropriately, your crops have to compete with each other, but they're only competing with each other if there's a limitation on nutrients and water that are available, and light too. So making sure, if you want both of those things, that you're not planting stuff that's going to shade out the other crop you want to keep. Another thing you can do, which we're all used to in Alaska, is transplanting things out, giving your plants a head start. It takes some money and labor to get things started indoors, but it can help pay dividends for weed control, and also open up options to use organic or synthetic pre-emergent herbicides in that garden bed, because now you could put that out there and then plant your, your no longer seedling cabbage or Brussels sprouts, broccoli, etc., whatever it might be. And then mulches can be organic or inorganic, meaning you can use things like straw or bark mulch to help keep weeds down. And then you can also use, plastics and those other woven fabrics to keep weeds down. Any of these can really affect kind of soil moisture and chemistry. So you just kind of want to be aware of that. The organic things I talked about, like straw and bark mulch. If you water lightly, the water is going to stay up on the top. If you get a lot of water, though, they actually can help keep a lot of that moisture in the ground. Those things will also cool the soil a little bit compared to some of the other stuff, like the weed barrier fabrics and plastics will actually heat the soil, but you might have to work a little bit harder as well to get the water down to penetrate into the soil underneath them. You can use water management too, especially in dry areas. If you don't have a fall like last year, in July, I guess, too, it's middle of July, it started raining and didn't stop. But if you use drip irrigation, or if you're in a covered, like a hoop house situation where you have to provide water, using something like a drip irrigation system can really help control those weeds. It's pretty expensive to start one up, but once you get it there, you've got it for years to come, and the maintenance costs are probably not that expensive in comparison. You can also use things like cover crops. I mentioned radishes and things like that. They can be pretty inexpensive, and sometimes you can harvest those. But if you use stuff that you can't harvest, it's going to take up space. And you also kind of need to be cognizant of other things you might bring in. If you have a big slug problem, using cover crops might not be the best idea, because you're creating habitat around your plants for those slugs. Whereas if like you have just a cabbage growing out in the middle of dirt, that's a pretty dry area, the slugs might not want to cross over. So it kind of depends on the whole situation and what all you're dealing with as far as whether or not cover crops and what type of cover crops are going to help you with weed management. And rotating, again, we talked about this a bit, putting aggressive garden species in when you have a weed issue, things that are easy to weed around, things you can mulch around. And then here's just some of those types of mulches as well. Bark, straw, and grass clippings, like I mentioned. Quickly though, some things about bark. When bark degrades, it doesn't have much nitrogen in it. And so the bacteria that degrade bark actually need nitrogen. So they're going to take nitrogen out of your soil. And so usually that's only going to happen in the upper layers. So it might not really impact your root system much, but it is something to be aware of. If you start to see plants that are growing less than you'd like to, and you've been using bark mulch, you might need to add more fertilizer to that, so that as the bark mulch breaks down, it's the bacteria involved in that aren't robbing the soil. Especially if, like, at the end of the season you incorporate the bark into the soil. Now you've through like rototilling or whatever, then you might have actually gotten that bark down in there, and then you might really start getting some of that out of the soil. Things like grass clippings, though, they can work really well. They tend to form kind of a mat and things like that around the plants, but they can also be something that really brings in other pests like slugs and fungus gnats and the like. But most of those natural materials, they do a good job of building organic matter, and as they degrade, other than the bark, they're going to add nutrients to the soil. And really, bark degrading in there is going to add something to the soil. It just happens that it kind of robs some of the nitrogen out in the process. And here's some examples. This is how you would put out like a weed barrier fabric. You lay it out. You can either bury the edges or put rocks on the edges of there, and then usually you kind of want to cut a hole in it, or like a little cross, plus sign in there, and then pull that back, plant your plant through there, put the plant back on top, and then use get water into it. the fabric that I show in this picture is pretty thin. So the plants, usually the weeds start to sprout up underneath it, but they press down really easily with your hand, and you don't have to actually compact the soil much to kill them off that way. The advantage of that and something thin that's breathable is that the water will easily go through it. So you don't necessarily have to have water underneath there, but it's always best to have something like a soaker hose or a drip irrigation system that's going to get the water right where you need it in the roots. Breathable materials also won't affect that soil chemistry as much. When you get plastics and things like that down there, it warms the soil quite a bit and traps moisture quite a bit if you're getting enough moisture down in there, but it can also kind of keep some of those, basically may overheat things. You know, if you're not getting enough oxygen in there, you don't want things to go anaerobic, but that would be kind of a combination of things like too much water and too much heat could make things go anaerobic. It's rare that that sort of thing happens, but it can occur. All right. So let's go to some questions if people have them.
Gino, one question was, where can you get seed? Let's see. Oh, I saw somebody answered it too, but it was seed potatoes was a question.
Yeah, good question. I don't know that the Matsu Experiment Farm in Palmer produces seed potatoes that are for sale. I've typically gone to any of your local garden stores and garden supply stores, and I've never seen them at the big box stores, but the places like the greenhouses and the nurseries will usually have them. In Anchorage, Mill and Feed tends to have them, but I would check at the other ones too that are around that sell plant starts and things like that. Those places, they should be carrying some seed potatoes. Some folks get them straight from farmers. I've done that on some years to get a certified seed potato as well. So
awesome. Thank you for that. And if anybody else has any other questions, do feel free. You can type those in the chat, or you can just unmute and chime in now with Gino. And then Gino, our host Nadine does have just a couple things to share here at the conclusion, and then we're going to share the recording of your presentation. And it's been
cool.
Great. I'm going to have to take the host back over from you here in a moment, but if you would advance, I think you have our slides as well that Nadine's going to reference.
So there is one. Someone mentioned the Wasilla Nursery on Lucas. Yep. So like I said, check with your nurseries. They'll have some. You might have to call around a little bit. Then there was another question. Any suggestions in particular for creeping buttercup, and are there any coordinated efforts to remove these area wide? Creeping buttercup's a tough one to manage. In your lawn, your weed and grass killers might be a good way to do it. Not the grass killers, but the ones that will kill the broadleaf weeds can sometimes get the buttercup out. You need to watch for, it's resistant to certain types of herbicides, so you need to pay attention to that. And if you're not getting a good kill on it, then give us a call and we can help you select the right thing. I can't remember exactly which ones it was resistant to off the top of my head. And then the coordinated efforts area wide depends where you're at. We don't have a ton of creeping buttercup around Anchorage, other than it sort of shows up around horse pastures and then in people's lawns that are nearby, but we don't have a ton in the wild. Some places like Kodiak Island, they've been trying to get rid of their creeping buttercup for a while. So
how about orange hawkweed, Gino?
Yeah, so orange hawkweed, it sort of depends on the spot you're in, where if it's in a lawn, I would suggest using like your general weed killer that's for lawns. Usually that works pretty well, as long as you also have for good fertilized grasses. And focusing on hawkweed early in the season is also good. So once things are just starting to actively grow is when that plant's most susceptible to an herbicide that you might put down on it. You might also try, if you're in a managed landscape and not right around trees, is using one of those triclopyr active ingredient products. And with the lawn weed killers, Usually those have something called 2,4-D in them, which has been around forever. If you can get one that also has a little dicamba in it, that's going to work a little better on the hawkweed than just the 2,4-D alone. But any of those three things in your kind of home landscape should work. Got to be careful with other broadleaf plants that are around and making sure you're not applying too much. Usually when we see problems with, you know, somebody's tree or shrubs or perennial bed having problems from like a lawn, you know, a weed killer that's meant to be used in your lawn, it's because they, you know, I'll ask them like, well, how often do you apply, you know, weed and feed or whatever it happens to be? And they're like, oh, every time I mow. And it's like, well, you've probably put too much down. Now it's, and then it rained real hard and then it ran off and went over into the flower bed too. So if you can make that, you know, those decisions, that's good. Just don't make sure you're monitoring the label, not applying too much. Near wild areas, you don't want to hurt. The best thing to probably do is to make sure you're just getting that herbicide right on the plant. So if you can get it just onto the hawkweed plant itself or whatever plant it is you're trying to manage, there's less herbicide that actually gets out into the environment. Some herbicides go through the plant and remain the herbicide in the plant even once it dies, but some herbicides don't. They get broken down into other things in that process.
You see the question on knotweed there, Gino?
Yeah, and from someone from Ketchikan, that's a tough one to kill. There's a guy in Juneau by the name of John Hudson who works with the Southeast Watershed Coalition, and he has big projects to manage knotweed in a variety of places. I'm not sure if he's going to get down to Ketchikan. He's been doing it primarily in Juneau where he's based, but I think they're doing that in some other places as well. Knotweed, the best thing to do that I've heard from him is to and read elsewhere, but his personal account is great because that's what works in Alaska, is to crimp it down. So in midsummer, so the knotweed is a cane-like plant that grows real tall and real dense. And so if you crimp it down in the middle of summer, and then remove that biomass, you can either leave it on site or remove it, but if you remove it, you got to make sure and dispose of it properly because little fragments of knotweed stems can actually resprout. Then what you want to do is apply an herbicide, probably containing glyphosate, late summer, early fall, especially he says when the leaves start to yellow, or just before they start to yellow. That's when he gets the best impact on the knotweed. And then you're gonna, crimping can be just cutting or knocking it over. If you don't have something to cut with it, if you can knock it over and break the stems, that'll have the same effect. What you're doing is you're helping starve that root system, but you're also creating short knotweeds instead of tall knotweeds. And so now you have you don't have to put as much herbicide on it to kill the root system because you get it on there and then it can get back down to the rest of those.
Very good. Thank you for answering those questions, Gino, and thank you for a great presentation on weed management. Much of this is so important. All of this is so important to all of us. Very good.
Cool.
Yeah, if you might advance the slide, I think we've got a couple slides there that our host Nadine will just close out with us. And I'm going to try to launch a poll, but I can't do it with the screen share still. So Nadine, you can take it away and then I will reclaim host and launch the poll right after.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for participating in today's program. We hope you found this session helpful. Please let us know. The poll will come up later, or you can send Patrick an email. If you have any ideas for upcoming webinars, please put them in the chat. Okay, so I'm kind of flying blind here. You can find all of our events at www.aarp.org/AK. Oh, and the poll is up. Yes, good, great. And it's 2 questions, pretty simple. If you're interested in registering for any of the upcoming spring gardening webinars, please go to the above website and click on the story titled Spring Gardening Series. That will take you to a web page that has links to register for upcoming webinars. It will also be the place where you can view the recordings of previous webinars. Okay, so if you're interested, and we hope you are, we'll see you on the site. Thank you, Gino, for sharing your knowledge with us today. And thank you for joining the webinar series. We'll be hosting a series every quarter, and we're planning a series on veterans resources, financial planning, technology, and a workout series during the winter months. To find out about the upcoming events, please check out our webpage at www.aarp.org/AK. Thank you, everyone. And that's all I have for today.
Thank you, Nadine. Thank you, Gino, and thank you to our audience. And thank you for your poll responses. We look forward to seeing everybody in the next part 3.
Ciao.
Hi, wait, can you stay? Those links aren't working for the, I clicked on like the PFD, there's Patrick did it at 11:14, the MSN News, and the other one, I clicked on them and the links